Hello and welcome, I'm Ruby Barlow and you're watching The Newsroom. Let's take a look at some headlines from this hour. US President Donald Trump has reportedly asked for edits to the deal with Iran, extending negotiations even further. Reportedly, the edits relate to assurances regarding the Strait of Hormuz and the nuclear program. Iran's foreign minister says Iran will not agree to any deal unless Iranian rights are secured. Iran denies reports of the resignation of President Masoud Pezeshkian. Reports cited a loss of authority within the Iranian political system. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ordered a deeper incursion into Lebanon despite a 6-week ceasefire. Israel has recaptured Beaufort Castle 26 years after troops pulled out. Over 1 million Lebanese have been displaced so far since the beginning of the conflict, roughly 4 months ago. Oil prices rise more than 2% as Israel pushes into Lebanon despite the ceasefire. US crude futures rose 2.71% to $89.73 a barrel, with Brent futures rising 2.37% to $93.28 a barrel. The World Health Organization reports that 4 nurses and a lab worker recover from their Ebola infections in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There has also been suspected Ebola cases being investigated in Brazil and Italy, one in Brazil being confirmed as negative, after travellers return home from Africa. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he wants to press on with securing peace talks with Russia before winter. Talks coordinated by the United States have stalled since the start of the Iran war roughly 4 months ago. Presidential elections in Colombia will head to a second round after no candidate won a clear majority in the first round. The 2 candidates will be Ivan Cepeda, who is considered the leftist candidate and ideological successor to current President Gustavo Petro, and Abelardo de la Espriella, who is considered a far-right and pro-Trump candidate. And finally, following the Parisian football team Saint-Germain's second consecutive Champions League win, more than 200 are injured and 1 person dead in Paris, the Interior Ministry of France confirms. The figure has reignited debate about street violence in the country. We start now today. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it has targeted an airbase it claims was used in a United States air attack on a telecommunications tower in Sirik Island in southern Iran. This breaking news comes from Iranian media that reported that the strike was carried out in retaliation for what Tehran described as American aggression against its infrastructure. The claim comes just hours after US Central Command announced strikes on Iranian radar and drone sites in Gorok and on Keshem Island. Neither side has provided further details, but the exchange marks another sharp escalation in tensions between Washington and Tehran. We now move to the United States. They have proposed a new plan aimed at reducing tensions between Israel and Lebanon as fighting continues despite a ceasefire announced more than 6 weeks ago. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio held talks with Lebanese President Joseph Aoun and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on a possible path towards de-escalation. Under the proposal, Hezbollah would halt all attacks on Israel, while Israel would refrain from escalating military operations in Lebanon. Washington says the plan could create space for a gradual reduction in hostilities, though differences remain over which side should take the first step. We are now joined by Roshan Gidwani, correspondent joining us from the NewsX World newsroom. Roshan, what updates do you have for us on this latest development?
Right, Ruby, essentially when I tell you more about these updates, I think it's very important to remember that essentially the crux of what's happening right now as far as the conflict is concerned between Israel and Lebanon has a lot to do with Hezbollah. And of course, whilst there has been a ceasefire, strikes have continued between Israel and Lebanon, and this has essentially reached to a climax point with, of course, the Beaufort Castle essentially being conquered just recently. So when it comes down to the news that I will share, it's very important to remember that whilst Marco Rubio does have a plan, like you mentioned, of course, only actions speak louder than words in this scenario. Now, let me tell you more. The United States has introduced a fresh diplomatic framework aimed at engineering a gradual de-escalation of hostilities between Israel and Lebanon. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio personally pitched the proposal during direct communications with Lebanese President Joseph Aoun and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The initiative arrives at a critical juncture, attempting to establish a stable framework for peace talks following a massive flare-up of cross-border violence. As far as violence is concerned, we've seen, however, in the last few months, Israel has attacked Lebanon. There's been 100 strikes in 10 minutes. I've seen images of essentially mothers being in flats that have essentially been blown up, sitting on their refrigerators whilst you can see right through their entire apartment. So it's quite a tragic and unfortunate incident or series of incidents that have been happening. Now, under the initial phase of the American plan, the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah would be required to immediately halt all rocket and drone attacks targeting Israeli territory. In exchange, the United States is asking Israel to exercise strategic restraint and refrain from executing further escalatory military operations in Beirut. U.S. officials emphasize that the primary goal is to carve out a secure diplomatic window to formalize an effective long-term cessation of hostilities. This is essentially sounding great, but like I just mentioned, we have to essentially see if it filters down to Hezbollah and they do in fact stop with their hostilities as well. Because if they don't, then we've seen how evidence has proven that Israel will just keep striking Lebanon and looking for Hezbollah soldiers. Implementing the truce now faces steep uphill battles on both sides of the border. Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, acting as a guarantor for Hezbollah's compliance, insisted that the burden rests on Israel to stop shooting first. Again, one side can stop, but if the other side does not, then these hostilities will escalate. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu has publicly maintained a hardline stance, ordering Israeli troops to advance deeper into southern Lebanon to systematically dismantle Hezbollah's infrastructure, explicitly stating that Israel cannot absorb ongoing attacks against its civilians. And I've spoken to some guests here on our bulletins on NewsX World, and with regards to Hezbollah as well, it seems very clear that Israel will essentially stand the test of time as far as going to every house and looking for Hezbollah soldiers. So even though this is a possible initiative that could come into fruition by the United States, only time will tell whether the results are actually good and will result in some sort of peace. The diplomatic push coincides with intense localized combat, highlighted by the Israeli military seizing the strategic 900-year-old Beaufort Castle and its surrounding ridge. This military push followed one of the heaviest days of Hezbollah rocket fire directed at northern Israel since a shaky April truce was established. Emphasis on shaky, as the situation threatens to spiral completely out of control. A crucial fourth round of direct U.S.-chaired peace talks is scheduled to commence in Washington to codify the legal parameters of a lasting ceasefire. So it's essentially late night Sunday in Washington. Tomorrow we'll have more news on this as well. Now, adding to the immense friction on the ground, a devastating Israeli dawn airstrike hit the town of Deir Zorani in Lebanon's Nabatea district just as negotiations were being floated. The strike resulted in at least 8 civilian casualties, including 3 women, and left 19 others wounded. This rapid spike in bloodshed underscores the fragile nature of the proposed framework, as regional mediators warn that mounting civilian casualties on both sides could completely derail Secretary Rubio's diplomatic window before formal talks even begin in Washington. And again, with regards to the situation between Israel and Lebanon, with Hezbollah involved as well, there has been an immense amount of fatalities, immense bloodshed, and of course so much destruction as far as living quarters are concerned. We've seen videos of apartments being blown up. So even if there is a ceasefire, even if this lasts for 1 or 2 years, the reparations involved may last a lot longer. So indeed quite tragic. But yes, if some sort of a ceasefire is reached, all shooting is stopped, this would be, of course, very fortunate. Back to you in the studio, Ruby.
Roshan, thanks for that update, but please don't go far. We're coming back to you very shortly. Now, a United States trade delegation led by Chief Negotiator Brendan Lynch is going to be in New Delhi for 4 days of talks aimed at finalising an interim India-US trade agreement. The negotiations come amid growing urgency to reach a deal before a new US tariff regime is expected to take effect in July. Officials say both sides have made significant progress, with US Trade Representative Jamison Greer and Ambassador Sergio Gore recently indicating that only a small portion of the agreement remains to be completed. However, differences persist over issues including agriculture, energy purchases and other US demands that India views as sensitive. New Delhi hopes a trade deal will help restore investor confidence and provide greater certainty for economic and business planning. Now back to you, Roshan. Roshan is our correspondent joining us from the newsroom. What more can you tell us about this trade deal set to be finalised?
Essentially, when it comes down to trade in 2026, with the surprise attacks on Iran from the US from February 28th this year, essentially what has happened to the entire global framework and landscape of trade is that it has shifted immensely, and no one really knows how to essentially circumvent what has happened. We've seen countries essentially set up their own trade deals to secure energy and food. Fertilizers have been hit as far as being exported through the Strait of Hormuz to countries as well. So as far as agriculture is concerned, that's been hit. And the repercussions are just global in the sense that because the Strait of Hormuz essentially used to transfer so much oil all around the world, now trade deals between nations need to be happening fast, and that's why this trade deal has some sort of an urgent sort of label on it, and it is happening in New Delhi, the capital of India, to essentially secure the future of both of these nations. Now let me tell you more. A high-level American delegation led by U.S. Chief Trade Negotiator Brendan Lynch has landed in New Delhi to commence intensive 4-day trade consultations with Indian officials running from June 1st to June 4th. These talks are specifically tailored to hammer out the legal framework of an interim reciprocal trade pact. The Indian side is being spearheaded by Darpan Jain, additional secretary in the Department of Commerce, with both nations eager to capitalize on momentum generated earlier this year. Like I mentioned, there is a profound sense of urgency which is overshadowing these meetings due to a strict ticking clock in Washington. Government sources indicate that India is highly motivated to seal the deal because the United States is poised to roll out a sweeping new tariff framework before July 24th. This upcoming American policy is expected to replace previous reciprocal tariffs, meaning negotiators have a narrow window to lock in preferential terms for bilateral trade before the broader regulatory landscape shifts. With regards to tariffs, of course, that affects businesses, how they do business, how they make profit. So, of course, this will be closely watched over the next few days. I'm very sure that businesses will be locking in, looking for news on how to keep making profits with regards to these tariffs and their trade deals with the U.S. and vice versa. Now, the foundational groundwork for this week's sprint was laid back in February when both global powers issued a joint statement outlining the initial phase of a proposed bilateral trade agreement, or BTA. A major breakthrough already on the table includes Washington agreeing to slash its proposed tariff rates on Indian goods from a steep 50% down to a highly favorable 18%. That's a 32% cut. Furthermore, the U.S. has offered to waive specific economic duties linked to India's ongoing procurement of Russian oil, providing massive relief to Indian exporters. With regards to oil, like I just mentioned, this year we've seen quite the crisis with regards to oil, with 20% of the global oil supply essentially being shut down or in shambles as far as how to move forward with getting oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, in return for these substantial concessions, New Delhi has committed to eliminating or deeply slashing import duties on a broad spectrum of American industrial goods and agricultural products to reinforce its status as a premier strategic partner over regional economic competitors. India has also signaled its intent to aggressively scale up total bilateral trade with the U.S. to a staggering $500 billion over the next 5 years. This week's face-to-face sessions in Delhi will focus on resolving final sticking points regarding market access, customs facilitation, and economic security alignment. Now, because the underlying American trade landscape has evolved dramatically since the preliminary February framework, like I mentioned, both teams are walking into these sessions prepared to fundamentally review and tweak previously agreed upon clauses. Lynch and Jane are scheduled to review detailed reports generated during the previous in-person summit held in Washington back in April to iron out last-minute friction points. Observers note that the success of this 4-day sprint will largely hinge on how flexibly both sides handle complex non-tariff barriers and customs bottlenecks, elements critical to ensuring the interim pact survives scrutiny back home. So, of course, we will track this as the week goes on. Back to you in the studio, Ruby.
Roshan, thanks very much for that update. Now we move to our next story. Some updates there are coming from US President Trump. He has said that artists should drop out of and cancelled the US Freedom 250 Festival after a number of artists pulled out of the event. In a sharp response to the withdrawals, Trump said cancel it, fueling fresh controversy around the high-profile celebration. The festival is designed to be a major part of events commemorating the 250th anniversary of the United States. However, the exit of several performers has raised questions about participation, organisation, and the event's future. Organisers have not yet indicated whether the festival will go ahead as planned, be modified, or be scrapped altogether. The developing dispute has triggered wider debates over politics, culture, and the role of public figures in national celebrations, drawing attention far beyond the festival itself. Back to you, Roshan. What more can you tell us about this celebration? Freedom 250, set to be cancelled after a large number of artists have pulled out.
Right, Ruby, when we think of the United States, maybe in 2026 as news anchors ourselves, it's very easy to essentially think of and allude to the Strait of Hormuz, the Iran crisis, but maybe let's go back to the 2000s or even the 90s. We think pop culture, we think blockbuster movies, and we definitely think of artists like Vanilla Ice singing Ice Ice Baby, and he's still interested in essentially representing America at the festival. But of course, Trump essentially not getting very good feedback from artists who want to support him celebrating 250 years of American freedom and America's essential birthday here of 250 years of being independent. He has found it extremely unfortunate in the sense that he's embarrassed that some artists have pulled out, for lack of a better word. Let me tell you more. U.S. President Donald Trump has aggressively called to scrap a high-profile concert series intended to anchor Freedom 250, the national celebration marking America's 250th anniversary. Taking to his Truth Social platform, Trump declared, "Cancel it," after a wave of prominent musical acts abruptly pulled out of the festival lineup. The president blasted the remaining itinerary as overpriced and boring, expressing fierce frustration that the entertainment portion of the semi-centennial milestone was fracturing. The controversy erupted after a succession of mainstream performers, including country star Martina McBride, rock frontman Bret Michaels of Poison, R&B icons, the Commodores, and hip-hop veteran Young MC, officially canceled their appearances. The artists uniformly claimed they were victimized by a bait and switch regarding the nature of the celebration. Many stated they signed on under the impression that Freedom 250 was an entirely nonpartisan, unified cultural event, only to later discover heavy political undercurrents and direct White House positioning. Now, Trump was furious over the withdrawals and retaliated online by labeling the departing musicians third-rate artists and claiming they had simply developed the yips ahead of their scheduled performances. He dismissed their absences by boastfully declaring himself the #1 attraction anywhere in the world. I'll just take a pause there, Ruby. Essentially, when we think of America as well with regards to Trump and excusing the Iran crisis and the Middle East crisis and everything else that's happened with regards to Trump politically, as far as Venezuela is concerned, Cuba as well, Trump is also a bit of a showbiz superstar, having his own show and, of course, having been in movies like Home Alone. And that's why he might have declared himself the #1 attraction anywhere in the world. He has also added a characteristically bold claim that his political events regularly draw vastly larger audiences than rock icon, and get this, Ruby, Elvis Presley did during his prime. Instead of moving forward with the compromised musical festival, Trump instructed his representatives to immediately explore replacing the concerts with a massive localized political rally on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., dubbing the proposed alternative the America is Back rally. Trump specified that only great patriots would be invited to what he promises will be a wild celebration. While a few artists like Vanilla Ice and Milli Vanilli still intend to play, maintaining that celebrating America's birthday transcends politics, the broader entertainment showcase appears fundamentally derailed. Essentially now, this public fallout introduces severe logistical and political complications for the broader multi-week Great American State Fair schedule on the National Mall, which Trump was originally slated to personally inaugurate on June 24th, while the White House-aligned Freedom 250 organization scrambled over the weekend to pivot a distinct, official, and entirely bipartisan congressional body known as America 250 has quietly chosen to distance itself from the drama. The Congressional Committee is moving forward with its own parallel, strictly nonpartisan 250th anniversary events focused primarily on historical exhibitions and independent Independence Day celebrations in legacy cities like Philadelphia and New York. And that's all I have for you. Back to you in the studio.
Roshan, thanks very much for that update there. We now move to Asia, to Sri Lanka, where a deadly crash has shocked the country after a suspected drunk driver ploughed into a soup kitchen, killing at least 6 people. Authorities say the vehicle struck individuals gathered at the community food distribution site, leaving several others injured. Emergency responders rushed to the scene to treat the wounded and transport victims to nearby hospitals. Police have taken the driver into custody and launched an investigation into the incident. The tragedy has sparked fresh concerns over drink driving and road safety, with officials vowing a thorough probe into the circumstances surrounding the crash. Now we move to a deadly explosion that has struck one of South Korea's major defense manufacturing facilities, leaving at least 5 people dead and 2 others injured. The blast occurred in the morning at a plant operated by Hanwha Aerospace in the city of Daejeon, about 150 kilometers south of Seoul. Emergency authorities said the explosion was reported at around 11 a.m. local time, triggering an immediate response from fire and rescue teams. Officials from the Daejeon fire headquarters confirmed that 5 people lost their lives in the incident, while 2 others suffered injuries. The condition of the injured has not yet been disclosed. According to preliminary information cited by South Korea's Yonhap news agency, the explosion is believed to have occurred inside the factory. Authorities have launched an investigation to determine the cause of the blast and whether safety failures may have played a role. Hanwha Aerospace is one of South Korea's leading defense companies, producing a wide range of military equipment, including artillery systems, weapons, missile components, aerospace technologies. The incident has raised concerns about industrial safety at strategic defense facilities as investigators work to establish exactly what led to the deadly explosion. Now we move to Latin America. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has rejected the results of the initial presidential election count, raising fresh concerns over the country's electoral process. Petro said he does not accept the preliminary results and called for greater scrutiny of the vote tally. His comments come as election authorities continue to process ballots and verify results. The dispute has sparked political debate across Colombia, with supporters and opponents closely watching developments. Officials have urged calm while the electoral review process continues. The controversy is expected to further intensify political tensions in the Latin American nation. Let's listen in.
El presidente de la República acaba de pronunciarse de manera clara sobre una de esas situaciones. Hay un desfase que queremos verificar en torno al censo electoral. Y ese no es cualquier desfase. Estamos hablando de 885,000 personas o cédulas.
And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.